Welcome to the Leadmore podcast. I'm your host, John T. Meyer. The Leadmore podcast is the show where we sit down with leaders of today to help inspire and create more leaders for tomorrow, because I believe the world needs more leaders, and I want you to be the next one. So let's go on this journey. Today's episode is with Andy Sparks. Andy Sparks is the founder and coach at Blue Dot. It's an executive CEO, founder-based coaching startup, and it's incredible. He works specifically with founders in the climate space, in the climate industry. Andy Sparks, prior to that, was a co-founder of a company called Mattermark, co-founder of a company called Holloway. He's been in the startup game since basically right out of college. He even attempted to start a brewery in college while he was still 19. We talk about that here in the episode. But we stumble into why climate, why coaching, and really just more so, why does coaching matter? Why do leaders need coaches? Even the best CEOs, the best leaders have coaches. And I think really everybody should have a coach, and also how you can be a coach in your own way. So awesome conversation. Andy is a super smart dude, great follow on Twitter, good writer, and you're going to enjoy this episode here. Take a listen to Andy Sparks. Welcome to another episode of the Leadmore podcast. I'm excited today to sit down and chat with Andy Sparks, the founder of Blue Dot Coaching. How are you, Andy?
Doing great. Thanks for having me here, John.
Yeah, and previously a startup founder, both Mattermark, amazing data intelligence company. I saw you also did Holloway. That was like a book publishing company. And then you started one. I saw it when I was reading, you did a brewery before you were 21 years old. Tell me about that.
A brewery is a embellished term.
Okay.
It was basically a buddy and I started homebrewing beer when I was like 19 in college, and we started selling it to some friends. And we got a little carried away with the creativity side of it, not just from brewing, but like, how do you start a business? And that's really where I remember going to Barnes & Noble and buying one of those NOLO books on how to start a business and what's the difference between LLCs. And like, I kind of cut my teeth on a lot of early ideas around businesses just from all of that period, which was really fun.
That's great. And then moved to San Francisco and kind of got the startup bug, right?
Yeah, I had joined a small company in Columbus because I went to school at Ohio State, and they were venture backed. And I did a little bit of like intern data entry work for a year, but it was a startup, and they were working out of a VC's office. And then after that, left and joined one of the first mobile app development agencies in Columbus. And they were like 2 or 3 people at the time. And I did a lot of design work and sales work. Usually those two don't go together, but they did.
Yeah, that's still different.
Yeah. And that's where like I just was reading TechCrunch every day, and eventually decided to convince 2 friends one to drop out, one to leave their job and move to San Francisco and start a company that we worked on for about a year before we shut it down.
Cool. Love it. So I have a lot of places I want to go in this conversation and talk about. Let's start with, let's just start with you. Tell me what you're doing right now, because you kind of moved into coaching, but you also made a little bit of I don't know if you'd call it a pivot or just more so like stuck your flag in the ground towards like what type of coaching you want to do. So tell us what Blue Dot is.
Yeah. So, Blue Dot is an executive coaching firm where we specialize in working with entrepreneurs addressing problems related to climate change. And it's not so much that there's unique problems for leaders working on climate change. It's just that I decided to become a coach. And then about 6 months into that, I was feeling like there was something missing that as I was just following some reading and also just personal experience with climate change of seeing the sky turn orange in San Francisco one day and all the wildfires. And I was reading a book on my front porch in San Francisco, or in Denver when we moved out here. And it was like the 35th day of 95-degree weather in Denver or something. So it just felt very real. And I felt like it was something I really needed to not sit on the sidelines for. So it was more of a narrowing of my approach. And I don't only work with climate change founders. It's just that I wanted to plant a flag in the ground and say, hey, think of me as the coach for anyone in climate. So I get referrals in that space, and that's been working pretty well for me.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, that's Lemon was built on that idea of being the world's best infographics, not the world's best design shop, right? So
yeah,
I can totally relate to that. And your website, I'll put it in the show notes, but like the copy is really, I know you're a good writer. I follow you on Twitter, and you had a pretty compelling story about like from your childhood that you reference. And you talked about the personal felt story of climate. Talk about that. Why was this something that was always in the back of your mind, or was it until that moment of sitting on your porch?
Yeah, well, I think the story you're referencing, is it the one about how I always wanted to get into be a scientist, but then I never did? Was it that one? Yeah. But my sister doesn't even remember this. I almost feel bad putting it on the website because she read it. She's like, "Really? I did that?"
I did.
But I remember being in third grade, and we watched a documentary about these scientists that lived in the canopy of the rainforest on Laserdisc, and I just remember coming home so excited to spend my life living in the canopy of the rainforest. And my sister told me to never tell anyone that ever again, because I'd get made fun of. And by no fault of my family and no blame to my family, I just wasn't encouraged to go down a scientific path. And I think had things been a little bit different, I probably would have. But instead, my family was more of like my mom was in English. She was a teacher, and my dad is a huge history buff. And so I think that those things were encouraged. But I also remember in our middle school, we had a planetarium, which is incredible. Like, how many middle schools have a planetarium?
Wow. Yeah.
And I remember watching two things there. One was Cosmos, which is heavily referenced on my website because I'm a huge Carl Sagan fan. And the second one was a sort of documentary video by the Charles and Ray Eames, which is like where they start out. It's like, what's your galactic zip code? Yeah. A lot of people don't realize that the designers who built the Eames chair and all this furniture also did this documentary. It's not really quite a documentary, but it's what's your galactic zip code, where you like, it's like, well, here's my neighborhood. And then it zooms out. Well, here's Earth. And then here's like the solar system. And then it just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger to give you kind of a sense of scale. So I've always been really interested in a lot of the, call it like popularized science. And then just as I've gotten older and followed more about climate change, it just feels like this is kind of our, there's a great quote in a book I read last night, like every generation has its apocalypse.
Yeah.
And I think this is kind of ours. And it just feels like something that I want to be able to sit on my porch with my grandkids one day and say, hey, I was at least trying to do something about it.
Yeah, I think that you hit it on the one that I think about the most, just that feeling of like, I have two little daughters, are we giving them a world better than we found it, right? And sometimes it's hard to say yes to that question. And
yeah, and that's even, I think, just a tall order to obviously we try to do that, but for me, it's more just, who knows if we're successful or not. But at least, honestly, it's even more downside protection that if for some reason the Earth's burning in 70 years and that everything's horrible, it's like, well, at least I tried.
Sure. Yeah. When you're 100 and watching it burn, you can be like, well, it was a good run.
Yeah, I think there'd at least be less guilt, so I don't know. I think I'm kind of new to the climate space, and I have a couple clients who are helping me get smart on a lot of the science, and but I think there's a lot of really exciting energy going into the space now, not just from missionaries who want to do something because they think it's right or they have some sort of grand sense of purpose, but also because I think there's quite a few people who are seeing that this may be one of the greatest economic reshufflings in a long time. And there's a lot of money to be made. And I'm all for that. If there's people that want to get in and work on climate because they think that there's money to be made, then great, because our incentives are aligned.
Yeah. And don't you think, is that what it'll finally take for people to wake up and care? I mean, that's kind of a hollow view, but it seems like that's maybe what it'll take, is economic incentive.
Absolutely. To some point, this stuff takes money. Mm-hmm. Fusion, zapping methane, like removing carbon from the atmosphere. these aren't cheap, these are capital intensive projects.
Yeah.
And banks and the people who have the capital in order to actually finance these projects, they're not going to do it unless they can see a return on it.
Mm-hmm.
Which is one of the most amazing things about things like solar, which solar now, you can do solar for almost a tenth of the cost of natural gas. And it's just a matter of rolling out that infrastructure. A lot of the mental models that we use in, rolling out new technology, it's like we're not even quite in the installation phase for something like solar power. And so the next 10 to 20 years, I think, are going to be really exciting. But there's also a lot of things that need attention that aren't quite getting it. I mean, carbon removal is one of these that has really started to become a possibility in the last couple of years. And the next 10 years, you're going to see if it's really possible on a larger scale, if they can get the financing for it.
Yeah, that's fascinating. We were talking before we hit record about there's a 20-minute VC episode with Harry Stebbings, and he had Chris Sacca on. Chris is, of course, a famous angel and tech investor, and now has moved all in on climate investing. And he lays out a pretty compelling case for like money is going to be made, but we need to get started now, right? Like before it's too late.
Yeah, and Lower Carbon just announced, I think 2 days ago, a dedicated carbon removal fund that's led by Ryan Orbuck, who was one of the guys who really started the carbon removal initiative at Stripe. And now he's running this whole new fund dedicated to funding companies over the next, who knows how long.
Cool. One more on climate, and then we'll go to coaching. The audience of the Leadmore podcast is very much like that next generation of leaders, people who are maybe kind of mid-career, early career. They see themselves climbing a company, starting a company. They already have started a company. Or like maybe someone like me, right, who is now in transition and doesn't know what's next. Climate to me definitely pulls at the heartstrings, but like when I think about it from my head, I'm like, oh my gosh, where do I get started? Like so overwhelming. So like if someone wants to make a difference, even as simple as like trying to, offset their carbon footprint or start a company, like where do they go? Like how do they get started?
Oh man. Well, there's a terrific post. Why don't I send it to you and you can put it in the show notes or something like that. I think I have it. I'll have to look it up and send it to you. But there's I think her name is Susan. She's a VC that's in climate, and she put together just a really great Medium article of like, hey, if you're interested in getting into climate, start here. And it's like, here's things you can read. Here's good podcasts to follow. Join Jason Jacobs, My Climate Journey,
follow him on Twitter,
MCJ group. There's enough people getting into this. I think there's some good like resources for just, hey, if you're thinking about getting into this, here's where to get started. And it's probably a better way to answer that question than whatever I can come up with in 30 seconds.
Okay. All right, we'll reference that. Okay, so now let's go to the kind of there's two reasons I wanted to bring on the show. We'll definitely talk about climate, but also talk about coaching. And I'm a big advocate for coaching. Had a CEO coach for about 3 years, totally changed the way I think, helped me think bigger, helped me think, investing in myself, which then in turn invests in my company and my team. And so I'm guessing you have a reason why you became a coach, or like, did you have a coach, or what sort of like triggered you onto the importance of leaders having coaches?
I began working with a coach, I think is somewhere when I was somewhere between 24 and 26, because when I started Mattermark, I was really young, and it was easily the single best decision I ever made in my professional career. I feel really grateful that Brad Feld was on our board, and he didn't push, but he recommended that all three of us founders work with a coach. Brad's one of the biggest advocates, and he's friends with Jared Kalana at Reboot. And I ended up working with a woman named Christina Harbridge, which was just terrific. She helped me with a lot of sort of a balance of learning how to be a manager, but also managing my own psychology and kind of digging into some of, why did I get irritated at work with certain people, helping me make decisions where I didn't quite have the confidence. And I worked with her through most of Mattermark. And then I saw her a couple times when I was at Holloway, and I really wish that I had kept up seeing her
Brought her with
a
you
lot more often.
Sure.
And I convinced myself that it was expensive and we didn't have that much money. And, we had raised a few $1,000,000. So like we had the money. I just,
Sure.
for some reason, I thought that I was beyond that. And when I look back on the 4 years at Holloway, I think that it would have been really different had my self-awareness of things would have been a lot different had I continued to see her more often. So short answer, I worked with a coach. It really changed my life. And then as I was beginning to think about leaving Holloway, a friend of mine said, "Hey, have you ever thought about being a coach?" Because we both know Khalid Halim, who's one of the co-founders of Reboot as well. And she's like, you kind of just do a lot of what Khalid does, like, but just at dinner. Like you don't ask anyone for money for it. And part of that is because after working with Christina, I found it a lot of fun when friends would, bring something up at over dinner or drinks or something. I found it fun to put into practice everything I'd learned to just be helpful with my friends. And so worked with a coach. Friends suggested I become a coach. And I was like, wow, I've never really considered that being a career path. And whenever I ask team members, colleagues for feedback, they always say, hey, one of the things that you're really, really good at is listening to people. And I never thought of listening as like a career. Like
Sure.
Design skills, I'm like, okay, I know how to do that's like you become a designer and then like there's a whole career path there. But if someone tells you you're really great at listening, it's like, great. Oh, well, but then I kind of connected the dots that, oh, well, what coaches do is they listen really well. And that is a career. And so I decided to talk to a few folks like Khalid and ask how you get into it. And I did an 8 or 9 month training program with a group called the Hudson Institute, which I definitely recommend if anyone's thinking of becoming a coach. Like definitely do one of the certification programs. It's the least you can do. I'm always sensitive to the criticism from therapists that coaching is something that people who don't want to do the work to become a PhD therapist do.
Sure. Sorry.
So anyway, I feel like I just rambled. So I'll stop.
No, you laid a few threads there that I want to pull on, and a couple that I experienced myself having a coach. This idea that holy crap, it's expensive first, and I think the good ones are at least, and realizing that like it's just such an investment, not only of just unlocking your time, but like even if you like I did it for 3 years, but I get those lessons and learnings for the forever, right? For, the next 40 years. So I thought that was interesting, but also that idea of listening. And I remember one time, because I thought it was expensive, after a few sessions with my coach, I was like, all he's doing is asking me questions and I'm answering them myself, right? Like, what am I paying for? And sort of this idea, but he's like pulling these answers out of you that you didn't realize you had. And so I'm curious if, I'm sure that's something that you're tactically trained on, or like talk to me about that, because like it isn't about I'm going to hire a coach and they're going to tell me what to do. It's like I'm going to hire a coach and they're going to ask me what I think. Like unpack that. Yeah.
So there's kind of a spectrum of what do coaches do, and I think that might be helpful to lay out first, and then I think it may partially or wholly answer your question. So a lot of people confuse coaches with advisors or consultants. And an advisor or consultant is someone that you hire to give you an answer, right? Like if you're trying to build a sales team, you hire someone who's built 10 sales teams and say,
sure,
how do I do this? And they say, well, this is kind of the way.
Like teach me how to fish and then we'll fish. Yeah.
Yeah. There's kind of some variability, but like there's pretty much a way, and just do the way. And a coach doesn't do that. Oftentimes people go to a coach because they want to become a better manager, and they say, well, just tell me what to do. And a coach almost never does that. I think really great coaches, as a caveat, will teach 20 to 30% of the time. And it's more so like, hey, this is what we just did. Or if you now want to use this with your team, or if there's some kind of theory or framework behind a particular challenge that someone's having, I think it can be really helpful for a coach to teach, but that's when it's with permission. So what does a coach really do? Coaching work is almost entirely inquiry driven. It's asking questions. But my favorite metaphor for coaching came from something I got from Reboot, which is if you think of the root of the word coaching comes from travel. So it's a coach, like it is a carriage that takes you from one place to another.
Sure.
And so if you picture Google Maps in your mind, everyone knows Google Maps, there's two fields. There's where you are right now and where you want to go. And so what coaches do is help you get a lot of clarity on where are you right now. So oftentimes people will show up to a session and they'll say, well, this is what I want to talk about. And that thing is really like an unfocused image under a microscope. Like, I think I might need to fire an executive on my team. And they think that that's what they want to explore. But then after, 6 or 7 questions from a coach, they find out, well, it's actually not so much about the executive, it's about my relationship with control and X, Y, and Z. And once a coach helps someone get really clear on where they are, what's the issue, what's on their mind, the next field is, well, where do you want to go? What do you want? It's the hardest question to answer. What do you want?
Yeah.
And so getting clarity on those two fields is really what a lot of coaches do. And it can be on a small scale, like an issue that you have with an executive, or it can be on a large scale of personal growth of how do you want to change and grow as a leader. And then once those two are clear, there's what route do you want to pick, right? Do you want to travel by train, by car, by foot? And the different ways that people want to travel to get to where they want to go is a lot about it's about choosing which one is most aligned with your values and becoming self-aware with that kind of thing. And that's the metaphor that I like to use for coaching versus therapy is so much more learning how you got to be the way that you are, understanding yourself. And both of them use inquiry, use questions.
Sure. So would you say is therapy looking backward, whereas coaching is maybe looking forward? Or
I think that's an oversimplification because it's also hard because there's like 400 different types of therapy. But I think a lot of therapists do help people with where they want to go. Maybe not all of them do, but I'm weary of oversimplifications of coaching and therapy because I think that both can they can overlap a lot. But I think generally a therapist more just helps you figure out how did I get to be the way that I am. And how am I? And so you can just kind of be more aware of that. And coaches can do some of that, but I think that therapists are also just a hell of a lot more trained to deal with different pathologies. If there's something that you're really struggling with, whether it be ADHD or whether it be depression or any long list of things where coaches just have almost no training on that kind of thing, and they need to be ready to refer out.
Certainly, at times, my coaching felt like therapy. In the same way that like a co-founder relationship, right? When your startup you're at the mountaintop, and then all of a sudden it feels like you're at the bottom. You just needed to vent and talk to somebody, and they can kind of help unpack those feelings. So if someone's listening to the show and they are in that category of kind of that Leadmore listener of like an aspiring leader, when is the timing that someone needs a coach, right? Because I think sometimes organizations, I know Lemonly's probably guilty of this. We made a decent amount of investment for leaders at the top, right? We're a small team of 18s. It's like I had a coach and sent into like a development program to my co-founder. But like, maybe if you're in the middle of the org chart, like what's the right time to find a coach?
Yeah, it's a good question. I will answer that. There are a lot of different types of coaches and different types of coaching that can get more affordable. There are founder coaches that can be really expensive. That's what I do. And part of the reason why they're inaccessible is because there aren't that many people who have built companies and decided to become coaches.
Sure.
And there's do you need to have been, in order to be a great jockey, do you need to have been a horse? Like, I love that. But a lot of people really want to work with someone who has the operating experience of a founder when they're a founder. And there's just not that many of them. And, supply and demand dynamics, when a lot of people want something that there aren't very many of, it's going to be expensive. But there's a lot of other coaches that can help with things that maybe people sort of at that middle layer deal with, that they don't need someone who's been a founder before, that can make it a little bit more affordable. So that's an option. And there's also group coaching. I know in engineering, there's a group called the SF Engineering Leadership Community. It's SFELC, and they do very targeted, pretty affordable kind of group coaching and peer groups for anyone that's an engineering leader, all the way from like you just became a manager to director to VP to CTOs. And so look for groups like that. I think the short answer to your question on when to look for a coach is anytime that you feel like you're struggling. If you're managing people, like if you're managing people, if you're new to it, whether you're new to it or a veteran, if you feel like you're not getting the results that you want or anything like that, I think it's a great time to work with a coach. I think that like it's kind of a funny question to ask, because it's like if you went to an athletic team and you said, when's the right time to work with a coach? The whole team's like, we all work with the coach. Like, what do you mean? Yeah. It's not just the quarterback and the guys making millions. It's like, it's everybody.
Yeah. Well, and I think you touched on things that kind of made me think of like, I've had that question in my head, like, oh, I wonder if I would be a good coach. Like, I think that's an interesting like career path. I like to help people, but there's this weird sort of gray area between like, I'll take a coffee here in Sioux Falls with anybody some young entrepreneur who wants to start a company or is building a company and needs help or questions. Like the transition from like a mentor / let's grab coffee and talk to like a coach. Because that's a little bit of a different, like it's a paid relationship. There's sort of a set of expectations. I don't know if you have some sort of outcomes or like, was that a hard transition to make from going to the dinner friend, helping your buddies to being like, I am a coach?
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely some boundaries that I think are helpful to set. I coached one friend and then said, I'm not doing that anymore.
Yeah.
Because, and there's a lot of good advice as you become a coach, not to do that, to make sure that you have some, at least some arm's reach or from who you decide to coach. But yeah, I don't coach friends or family for that matter, because it is a little bit challenging to make that transition. I don't know if I fully answered your question. I feel.
No, I just think that maybe it was more of a statement.
But here's the other thought that I had that I lost for a second. I think a lot of the reason why it's helpful for coaches to do a little bit of teaching, especially when they're teaching that upper layer of a company, is because they're teaching those managers how to become coaches for the people that work for them. They may not, the company may not have budget, or that person may not have the ability to go and hire a coach. I mean, a lot of what great managers do is coach.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that's what a lot of managers get wrong, is that they think that their job is to tell someone what to do. And, all of the subreddit of anti-work, I don't know if you follow that at all. It's like this big exploding movement of people that just have these horrible bosses and these text message threads of, you need to come in today. And they're like, but you told me I could take Thanksgiving off 6 months ago. And they're like, well, you need to cancel your flight and come in. And people just quitting like crazy because they have these horrible bosses. And the term boss is also terrible because it's like boss you around, right?
Yeah.
But really great managers learn how to coach, and coaching is so much about asking questions. It's not, hey, this project is late. Why is it late? The first thing you learn as a coach is do not ask questions that start with why, unless you want to put someone on the defensive deliberately.
Oh, that's good.
And so ask questions with what and how. And so if a project's late, hey, what's going on here? What do you think caused this to be late? I want to help figure this out so maybe it doesn't happen again, or, what's going on? What can we learn? What does this moment have to teach us? Oh, well, we noticed that projects are late when X, Y, and Z happen. So, okay, let's take some steps to avoid having that happen in the future, as opposed to assigning blame and that kind of thing.
That's a really good little framework there. Yeah. Of the what and how. That's good. Yeah. I think that's probably my main goal this episode is someone listening to this, if they run a business or want to, recognizes the value of coaching. Because in that type of relationship, hiring a coach just to come in and even work with your managers for a while, like in a group setting, like you said, it could be the ROI of that. I think, I remember in our team at Lemonly, I had everybody read the Making a Manager book by Julie. I think her name is Zhu. I don't know how you say her last name, and she grew up as like a young designer at Facebook and became a manager in a small company like Lemonly. That's our story. All of a sudden, we go from 6 to 12 and you're a manager, and no one teaches you how to be a manager. You just become one. And I think that's an opportunity too, where coaching could be so vital to an organization.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's where it can be tough. I think one of my criticisms was coaching as a field is that, and I'm new to it, so who knows if I retract this opinion or not, is that I think that a lot of coaching is open-ended questions. So it's not asking leading questions. And sometimes someone's like, okay, yeah, but like, teach me a little bit. Like not tell me what to do, but like, help me figure out how to handle this for myself in the future, as opposed to like, a lot of what a coach does is you hold your client as independently resourceful. Mm-hmm. So you always believe and hold that they can figure it out for themselves. But part of me is like, do we really need to make sure, like, it feels cruel to make every client figure out management for themselves. when there's like great people like, Andy,
well-established resources and templates and frameworks. Yeah.
There's a lot of really good stuff out there that it's like, take it or leave it. But I think it's worth at least exploring and learning from the people that came before us.
Yeah, I agree with that. So one more about this, and then we'll finish a little rapid fire. You're embarking on this. You said you're relatively new to coaching and certainly new to kind of putting your flag into climate phase. So like if I brought you back 10 years from now, like what's your hope for coaching, sort of your coaching business, but also the hope for for climate? How do we know that we are making progress in climate? And maybe how can you, like, I love to think of the little dots connecting of you helping a coach who then helping a client who then builds a climate company who then helps the planet. Like it's a long tail, but it's there. So like, where do you want this to go in 10 years?
In 10 years, I think one thing that's pretty different about this business versus the other businesses that I've built is it's kind of a lifestyle business. I don't need this to be a giant company. The impact that I know that I can make and I hope to make
can be giant.
Yeah, I think that if it's 40 CEOs who, being a CEO and starting a company is hard. Part of the reason why people hire a coach is because they're lonely. Because their spouse is sick of hearing about their problems. They can't talk to their co-founder because sometimes their co-founder
is the problem.
Having problems. Sure. Yeah. Or they think the co-founder is the problem and it's really they're the problem. But
sure.
It's lonely. They don't know who to talk to. And so that whole experience is so hard that working with a coach, I think it's not necessarily make or break. Like, I don't think it's necessarily on the coach. It's the CEO who's making the decision to work on themselves, who should take the lion's share of the credit. But I hope to work with some really great companies. And selfishly, I want to be being part of something that becomes really successful is fun. And so that's kind of, I hope that Blue Dot, I don't know if it needs to be huge or if it's just a few people that are working with climate founders, but also, carrying a little bit of the torch of what I have on the homepage is, Carl Sagan's idea that in order to become a multi-planetary species, we need to become a more confident, far-seeing, capable, and prudent version of humanity. And so if there's anything that I really hope that I can kind of spread through clients and then trickle down through everyone is just this idea that it's an idealistic concept that we need to grow up. Mm-hmm. We're still a very adolescent species. And I think coaching is a really interesting way to sort of propagate ideas about how to organize and treat people better. It's not necessarily, I don't necessarily tell my clients, hey, you have to treat your people better, but I do say, hey, if you don't treat your people better, then they're going to quit and you're probably not going to be successful.
Yeah, I think of like in all the narrative of sort of self-improvement and productivity, it seems like the lens is often like very much, it's all on us, right? We gotta wake up early, you gotta read books, you gotta work out, you gotta do all, and all that might be true, but like the idea of coach, like you don't have to be alone in this journey, right? Like somebody can be with you as a guide to help you get better. And
I think one thing that I would hope, and I don't know if will be part of it. But one thing I hope is that we see as, a CEO of an incredibly successful business, like something on the order of success, like a Tesla or SpaceX, but the CEO isn't yelling at their employees, telling them to come in over the weekend. And, Elon is just notorious for being a very difficult CEO to work for. I think that it's completely possible for the world to have leaders who build very successful, high impact companies that aren't like that, and treat their people better. And I hope that's one big hope that I have.
That's great. That's a perfect spot to end on the leadership front. So a few rapid fire just about you, Andy. A book that you recommend to people most often, or someone, whether it be about coaching or climate or anything.
So I'll give two, one fiction and one nonfiction. The nonfiction book I recommend the most as a coach is Andy Grove's High Output Management. Buy it, read it, put it on your desk. At any given point in time as a CEO, maybe 15 or 10 pages of that book are highly relevant to whatever you're doing.
Sure.
And he was a management a genius, and it's a shame that he passed away a few years ago. And then for fiction, I would recommend either The Expanse. There's 9 books in the series, and it's science fiction. It's about when, it's just a really cool book that I think anyone in tech would love. And then maybe one other, I'd say the Wheel of Time series, which now is on Amazon. But it's a great one that I learned a lot about leadership from the characters as they developed and took on the weight of the world in those books. So I really enjoyed reading all of those as I was sort of growing as a leader myself.
Cool. That's great. As a leader yourself, how do you, I always make sure to emphasize on this show the importance of unplugging, and we can be in the game so much. So for your mental health, physical health, what do you like to do when you unplug?
Oh, it's so much easier for me now.
Being in Denver?
Well, being in Denver and just not running a venture-backed company.
Sure. Yeah. Stakes are a little different.
Yeah. So, one thing is I'm reminded of Conscious Leadership Group has a commitment that's just about taking responsibility for your own mental, physical, spirit, all the different healths, just really taking responsibility for all of those, and that knowing that you're responsible for all those things and not blaming anyone else.
I like that.
So I've configured my life. So I generally don't do sessions until 11 a.m. My last one ends at 4:30 every day. The mornings are wide open for me. Some mornings I sit and read a book and just drink coffee. My friend Jonathan Basker, who's also a coach, said it's kind of an interesting job as a coach, because your job in many ways is to be a centered person, just to show other CEOs what that's like. And so sometimes your job is like show up in the morning and just sit and read coffee and read a book for 3 hours, so you can show up for the next 3 sessions that you have that day, calm and centered and not hungover or, any number of different stressed out states. So I definitely read. I get 9 hours of sleep every night, which is incredible. Sleep is the greatest. It's the number one thing that you can do for your health. Whether it's physical exercise, diet, sleep's the biggest predictor of long-term wellness. So 9 hours of sleep, and then taking walks, date nights, always do date nights. And then I love to play video games still. So I'm right now playing Age of Empires 4, just came out, and it's like totally it's just still fun. Oh, and then finally I like to write still. So I'm actually working on fiction for the first time. And it's both challenging, but it's one of the first things that I'm doing in my life that I don't have, I'm not trying to do it to become a best-selling author. I'm just doing it because it's fun.
For yourself. Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
Tons of great answers there. Awesome. That's great. I know my coach, the first thing he'll even teaches his clients are just about drinking more water, right? It's just like a low-hanging fruit thing, but the impact is there. You feel it. And that the sleep is exactly that way too.
Definitely. Yeah. No caffeine after 10 a.m.
Yeah. I'm getting close. It's 10 a.m. Well, we won't talk about that. So let's talk about superpowers. What's the thing you do best? How do you brag about yourself?
I think I'd go back to my earlier answer on listening. I think I was very good at it when I started this, and I think I've gotten even better.
Cool.
Yeah, and a lot of listening is using silence, letting someone else. I mean, sometimes I just sit and I count to 20 after a client says something to see if they've got anything else. But
good.
Listening, most communication is nonverbal. And so a lot of listening isn't just listening to what people say. And part of it is listening to what they don't say, but it's also looking at body language and the way that people move their face. And that's something that I think is a big part. And people say, how did you know? How did you know that was the thing? Well, you were screaming it from all of your body language.
Yeah. So listening, not just with your ears, right? With your eyes.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's great. That's really good. That's probably the part that I would, if I were to ever be a coach, I would definitely have to work on that. The counting, it's like, I feel silence, right? I'm like a leader who's got opinions, likes to speak, be in front, being able to step back and just shut up.
Yeah. Yeah. And I actually would add one other superpower now that because that's why I always say listening. And the second one is, I'm almost like an archivist. Like I collect resources, and I have this table engine of like 200 or 300 different either articles or frameworks or like things that I can just pop out and use at any given moment. And I almost use them like little prescriptions for clients where it's like, okay, this is a highly specialized, this is 6 pages from a book that I put into Notion, and it's an absolute violation of copyright. But here, now you don't have to read the whole book, just read the 6 pages.
Sure. That's great. Well, the last question we always ask on the show are, who are the leaders that inspire you? Whether you want to thank them and give back to them, friends that you know, family, or just people you've studied and read.
Yeah, I have some heroes, real people that I really look up to. One of them was Carl Sagan, because I think Carl Sagan just really married the scientific with the almost like emotional, the beautiful part of science, not just the math, but really like the poetic part of it. I think he was just incredible. And Richard Feynman as well, another physicist, scientist who was great at finding something new and explaining it really well. And just really, both of them show how critical it is not just to know something, but to be able to share it and communicate it and teach. So 2 great teachers, scientists. People that I've actually met that I really admire. I really feel grateful for having met Brad Feld as young as I did. Just a terrific leader in terms of how much he gives back, but also just a direct communicator. Gave me some really good advice in my career. And I know that he says that he sees himself as the combination of 3 people: Warren Buffett, Bill Gates, and Yoda, I think they were. And I appreciate that he included Yoda. And so I think that one of the other ones that I always consider who's not a real person is Gandalf or Merlin, or like the sage character, right?
Sure. Yeah.
And I'm fascinated with this idea of we see old wise wizards, but we never see them when they're young.
Yeah.
It's like, how did they get to be that way? And I'm really fascinated with that entire journey of.
So you're the young wizard because you have a small beard, right? And you're working on the big beard.
One could hope, right? So I just love that idea of these wise people that we see, know, and think of. They have their own journeys, and you rarely hear their story when they're 20 or 30 or 40. You'll see them when they're 70 or 80.
Yeah, we need like the Marvel origin story of like Merlin, right? Like, let's go back to the beginning. Like, how did he become Merlin?
Yeah.
That'd be great. Well, this is enjoyable, Andy. Thanks for taking some time, and it's fun to see someone you followed and talk about these topics, face to face here. So, thanks so much. Where can people find you or learn more about the coaching business?
Yeah, my website is lookbluedot.com. And I'm pretty active on Twitter. That's a great place to find me. My DMs are open, and my Twitter handle is SparksZilla, SPARK. Okay, I just spelled my last name, SPARKSZILLA.
Cool. Awesome. Thanks so much, Andy. Take care.
Sure thing. Thanks, John.
All right, that was our episode with Andy Sparks. Andy, thank you for the time. Thanks for the Zoom call. Great to catch up. If you want to listen to more episodes of the Leadmore podcast, we encourage you to subscribe. You can subscribe on Apple Podcast. You can follow on Spotify. We push the podcast wherever you can listen to them. You'll find it. So subscribe, follow. We drop new episodes every Thursday, and I encourage you to subscribe. Thank you so much. As always, take care and be well.